Before we dive in, I want to send a warm, gentle thank you to Ella Brooks from Minneapolis and Paige Sullivan from Atlanta. You two, and so many women here, are always the heart of the comment section. Your empathy is what makes these stories feel alive. And today's ending, it doesn't shock, it breaks. In the softest, saddest, most beautiful possible way. But YouTube doesn't show the final chapter unless you're subscribed. It simply disappears. So subscribe, leave your like, and tell me where you're watching from. I love knowing where these stories find a home. Before we go any further, tell us where you're listening from. We love seeing how far our stories reach. And listen, what you're about to hear will shatter you, then rebuild you into something stronger. A bride abandoned 30 minutes before her wedding. A single father who appeared in a garden when she needed him most. And a love so powerful, so unexpected, it rewrote both their stories forever. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because this ending will leave you breathless, crying happy tears and believing in second chances. You don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's begin. The sound reached Malcolm first, a deep, tearing sob that seemed to rip through the spring air like a wound opening. He froze mid-step, his hand on his daughter's shoulder just outside the side entrance to Riverside Community Church in Burlington, Vermont. It was the kind of crying that tightens your throat, the kind that speaks of something shattered beyond repair. "Daddy, what's that sound?" 6-year-old Autumn whispered, looking up at him with wide eyes. Malcolm hesitated. They were here for a birthday party. A classmate of his daughter's was celebrating in the fellowship hall at 2 p.m. It was May 14th, 2023, a beautiful Saturday morning, the kind where the sun filtered through new leaves and made everything look softer, kinder than it actually was. They'd arrived early to help with preparations. This wasn't their business. Whatever was happening around that corner in the side garden of the church had nothing to do with them. But the crying continued, raw, desperate, the sound of someone whose world had just collapsed. "Stay here, sweetheart," Malcolm said quietly, positioning Autumn by the door. "Don't move. I'll be right back." He rounded the corner and stopped dead in his tracks. A woman sat in a wheelchair in the church garden, surrounded by fallen white rose petals. She wore a wedding dress, an elaborate creation with delicate lace sleeves, and a train that wrapped around her wheelchair like melting snow. Her blonde hair was styled in an intricate updo with small white flowers woven through it. Her makeup, clearly applied with painstaking care, was now streaked across her face in mascara rivers. She was completely alone on what was obviously supposed to be her wedding day. The woman's hands trembled as she gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. Her shoulders shook with each sob. She hadn't noticed Malcolm yet, lost in her own despair. And he stood there, frozen, uncertain whether to approach or retreat, whether his presence would be an intrusion or an act of kindness. The decision was made for him when she looked up. Her hazel eyes met his, and for a moment, they just stared at each other. She looked surprised, then embarrassed, then resigned, as if she'd already lost so much dignity today that one additional witness to her pain barely mattered. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse and broken. "I didn't think anyone would see me out here." Malcolm took a cautious step forward. "Are you okay?" The moment the words left his mouth, he wanted to take them back. She clearly wasn't okay. Nothing about this scene suggested okay. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped her throat. "Am I okay?" She gestured at herself. The dress, the wheelchair, the tears, the garden that should have been filled with wedding guests but was empty except for the two of them. Today was, supposed to be my wedding day. I'm in my dress. Guests were arriving, and my fiancé told me 30 minutes ago that he can't marry me. The words landed like a physical blow. "Can't do it," she continued, her voice wavering between fury and heartbreak. "He looked me in the eyes this morning and said he can't marry me. Not because he doesn't love me, not because we're not compatible, but because of this." She slapped the armrest of her wheelchair, the sound sharp in the quiet garden. "Because I can't walk." Malcolm felt his stomach drop. "Can't marry someone in a wheelchair," she said, each word deliberate and cutting. He said he tried. He said he really, really tried to come to terms with it. But looking at me in this dress, knowing I'd never walk down the aisle like we'd planned, knowing our future would be complicated, he couldn't do it. So he left, just walked out of the church, left me here in this dress with 200 people about to arrive. The silence that followed was, suffocating. Malcolm stood there, this complete stranger in a church garden, watching a woman's world fall apart in real time. He'd experienced pain in his life, the kind that carved deep grooves in your soul. But to be rejected on your wedding day, in your wedding dress, for something entirely beyond your control, that was a cruelty he couldn't comprehend. 8 months ago, the woman said suddenly, her voice quieter now, almost detached. I was working at a veterinary clinic. I loved my job, loved the animals. I was good at what I did. She stared at her hands, at the engagement ring still on her finger, a simple solitaire that caught the light and mocked her with its promises. There was an accident. A storage shelf fell on me. The weight crushed my spine. Surgery saved my life, but her jaw clenched. I'm paralyzed from the waist down. I'll never walk again. Malcolm's heart broke a little more. Tyler, my fiancé, said he'd stay. He visited me in the hospital, held my hand through. Rehab. Said it didn't matter, that we'd get through this together. We postponed the wedding 6 months so I could focus on recovery. He seemed supportive, said all the right things, and I believed him. I thought he really meant it. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. But he didn't. No. The word came out like a sigh, like the last bit of air leaving a balloon. 3 weeks ago, I started noticing changes, small things. He stopped holding my hand. He'd flinch when he had to help me with the wheelchair. When he looked at me, there was this doubt in his eyes. But I told myself I was imagining it. I wanted so badly to believe he loved me enough. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara across her cheek. This morning, I was in the bridal room with my sister Naomi, getting ready. I was nervous but excited. And then Tyler walked in. He wasn't supposed to see me before the ceremony. Bad luck, you know. A bitter laugh. He said he needed to talk, and he just told me. Said he can't do it. That for months he'd been trying to convince himself he could handle it. But he can't. That he wants a normal life with a normal wife. The last words came out strangled, and new tears spilled down her face. He said he was sorry. Like, sorry could fix this. Like, sorry could undo the fact that he'd been lying to me for months. That he let me plan this entire wedding. Let me believe in us. Let me stand here today thinking I was about to marry the love of my life, when the whole time he was just trying to find the courage to abandon me. Malcolm felt anger rising in his chest. Not at this woman, but at the man who'd done this to her. At the cowardice it took to wait until the actual wedding day to break someone's heart. At the cruelty of letting her hope right up until the last possible moment. But anger wouldn't help her now. I'm very sorry, Malcolm said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. The woman looked at him, really looked at him, as if trying to understand why this stranger was still standing there, listening to her pain. The worst part? She said, her voice cracking. Everyone will understand. They'll say Tyler was brave for trying. They'll say it's understandable that he couldn't handle being married to someone with a disability. They'll pity me. Poor paralyzed Tessa, rejected at the altar. For the rest of my life, this will be my story. The bride who was left because she couldn't walk. Tessa. So that was her name. That won't be your story, Malcolm heard himself say. She looked at him skeptically. How do you know? Because you decide what your story is, he said firmly. Not him. Not the people in this church. You. What happened today doesn't define you. It defines him. It shows who he is, and that's not pretty. But it says nothing about your worth. Tessa's eyes filled with fresh tears, but something in her expression shifted slightly. That's easy to say when you're not the one sitting in the wheelchair, she said quietly. You're right, Malcolm admitted. I can't know what you're feeling right now, but I do know what it's like to be abandoned by someone who promised to stay. The words hung in the air between them. Tessa studied his face, and Malcolm could see her mind working, trying to piece together what he meant. I'm a single father, he said. My daughter, that little girl I told to wait by the door, her name is Autumn. She's 6 years old, and she has epilepsy. Understanding flickered across Tessa's face. Her mother left us when Autumn was 2, Malcolm continued, old wounds still tender even after 4 years. She said she wasn't ready for the responsibility, said she couldn't handle the seizures, the hospital visits, the constant worry. She wanted a different life, so she left. Just like that. Left both of us. I'm sorry, Tessa whispered. Malcolm shook his head. I'm not telling you this for sympathy. I'm telling you because I understand what it's like when someone you love decides you're not worth the difficulty, when they choose convenience over commitment. And I'm telling you that it says everything about them and nothing about you. Tessa's hands stopped trembling. She was listening now, really listening. For a long time after my wife left, I thought maybe she was right, Malcolm admitted. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe Autumn and I were too much work. Maybe we didn't deserve someone who would stay. But then, I realized something. What? Tessa asked quietly. Love, real love, isn't about finding someone when life is easy. It's about choosing to stay when life gets hard. It's about looking at someone's challenges and saying, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Your fiancé failed that test, but that doesn't mean you're not worth someone who'll pass it. The garden fell silent except for the distant sound of birds and the rustle of leaves in the spring breeze. Tessa looked down at her engagement ring. Then slowly, deliberately, she slid it off her finger and laid it in her lap. Tyler told me this morning he wanted a normal wife, she said. Someone who could walk beside him. Someone whose life wouldn't require adjustments or changes. Someone easier. Then he wanted the wrong things, Malcolm said simply. Before Tessa could respond, they heard small footsteps, and both turned to see Autumn peeking around the corner. She'd clearly ignored her father's instruction to stay put. Daddy, you were gone a long time. Then her eyes landed on Tessa and widened. Wow, you look like a princess. Despite everything, despite the tears and the broken heart and the ruined wedding, Tessa laughed. It was small and watery, but it was real. Thank you, sweetheart, Tessa said. My name is Tessa. I'm Autumn. The little girl stepped closer, completely unfazed by the wheelchair, the tears, or the dramatic scene she'd stumbled into. Why are you sad? Princesses aren't supposed to be sad. Sometimes even princesses have bad days, Tessa said gently. Autumn considered this seriously, then nodded. My daddy always says bad days don't last forever, and that the sun always comes back, even after rain. Malcolm felt his heart swell with pride at his daughter's kindness. That's very wise, Tessa said. Can I sit with you? Autumn asked. You look like you could use a friend. And without waiting for permission, Autumn sat down on the grass beside Tessa's wheelchair. She reached out and gently touched one of the white flowers. In Tessa's hair. They're so pretty, Autumn said. Did someone special put them there? My sister did, Tessa said quietly. This morning, before... She didn't finish the sentence, but Autumn seemed to understand that something sad had happened. Well, I think you look beautiful, Autumn declared with the absolute certainty only a 6-year-old can muster. And I think whoever made you sad was wrong. Tessa's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't entirely sad. She looked at this little girl who'd appeared out of nowhere, offering uncomplicated kindness without expectations, and something in her chest loosened slightly. Malcolm watched his daughter and this broken stranger and made a decision that would seem insane to anyone else. He sat down on the grass, right there in his jeans, on the ground beside Autumn, completing their little circle. Tessa stared at him in amazement. You don't have to. I know, he said, but I'm going to anyway. And so they sat there, the 3 of them, in that church garden on what should have been Tessa's wedding day. The sun filtered through the trees overhead. Rose petals scattered around them like fallen snow, and for the first time since Tyler had walked out, Tessa didn't feel completely alone. What's your favorite animal? Autumn asked suddenly, her voice bright and curious. Tessa blinked, surprised by the question. Actually, I work with animals, or I worked with them before the accident. I'm a veterinary assistant. Really? Autumn's face lit up. Do you like dogs? We have a dog at home named Biscuit. He's old and sleeps a lot, but he's really nice. I love dogs, Tessa said, and for the first time that morning, her smile reached her eyes. Maybe you could meet Biscuit sometime, Autumn said matter-of-factly. He makes people feel better when they're sad. Daddy says it's his superpower. Malcolm met Tessa's gaze over Autumn's head, and something passed between them. Understanding. Connection. Possibility neither of them had expected. Footsteps approached from the church, and Tessa's sister Naomi appeared. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. When she saw Tessa sitting with Malcolm and Autumn, confusion flickered across her features. "Tess," Naomi said carefully, "we really need to figure out what to do. Mom and Dad are inside with the wedding coordinator. Most of the guests have left, but there are still people asking questions and—" She stopped, noticing for the first time that Tessa wasn't crying anymore. "Are you okay?" "No," Tessa said honestly, "but I will be. Give me a few more minutes." Naomi looked at Malcolm and Autumn, clearly trying to piece together what was happening. Malcolm stood and gave her a reassuring nod, a silent message that her sister was safe, that they weren't here to harm or gawk at a tragedy. Naomi seemed to understand. "A few minutes," she agreed quietly. "Then we need to get you out of that dress and home." After Naomi disappeared back into the church, Autumn turned to Tessa with sudden determination. "You know what?" the little girl announced. "I think we should have a party right here. A happy party to make up for the sad one." "Autumn," Malcolm began, but Tessa interrupted. "Actually, that sounds perfect." Autumn beamed and immediately started gathering rose petals from the ground, arranging them in a small pile. "These can be decorations. And Daddy, you have your phone, right? We can play music." Malcolm pulled out his phone, scrolling through his playlist. "What kind of music do princesses like?" Tessa's laugh was genuine this time. "Nobody's asked me that in a very long time." "Then it's about time someone did," Malcolm said, and pressed play. Soft acoustic music flowed from his phone's speaker. Nothing grand or dramatic, just gentle guitar and a warm voice singing about new beginnings. Autumn handed Tessa a small bouquet of rose petals she'd arranged. "Every princess needs flowers," she said seriously. Tessa accepted them, holding the delicate petals in her palm, and something shifted inside her. This wasn't the wedding she'd planned. This wasn't the celebration she'd imagined. But in this strange, unexpected moment, sitting in a garden with a kind stranger and his daughter, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt seen, not as a woman in a wheelchair, not as a rejected bride, not as someone to be pitied or fixed or carefully avoided, just as Tessa. "Thank you," she whispered, looking at Malcolm. "You didn't have to stop, didn't have to stay, didn't have to do any of this." "Yes, I did," Malcolm said quietly. "Sometimes the most important thing we can do is just show up, even when it's not our place, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then." Tessa studied his face, the sincerity in his eyes, the gentle way he spoke, the ease with which he'd sat down on the grass beside a crying stranger. This man, whoever he was, understood something fundamental about kindness that Tyler had never grasped, that it wasn't about grand gestures or perfect words. It was about presence, about staying, about sitting in the mess with someone and not running away. "I don't even know your name," Tessa said suddenly, realizing they'd been sitting here for 20 minutes, and she'd never asked. "Malcolm," he said. "Malcolm Foster." "Well, Malcolm Foster, you might have just saved my life today." "I didn't save anything," Malcolm said gently. "I just reminded you of what you already know, that you're stronger than this moment, and that what happened today doesn't write the rest of your story." They sat together for a while longer, the three of them, as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Autumn chattered about school and Biscuit the dog and her favorite books. Tessa found herself actually listening, actually engaging, actually feeling something other than crushing despair. When it was finally time to go, when Tessa's parents emerged from the church looking exhausted and worried, Malcolm stood and brushed grass from his jeans. "I should let you go," he said. "But before I do, can I give you something?" Tessa nodded. Malcolm pulled out a small notepad from his pocket, scribbled something, and handed her the page. It was his phone number. "I'm not trying to be weird or inappropriate, and there's no pressure," he said. "But if you ever need someone to talk to, someone who understands what it's like to be abandoned by someone who should have stayed, I'm here. Even if it's just to listen." Tessa took the paper, her fingers trembling slightly. "Why are you being so kind to me? You don't know me." "Maybe that's exactly why," he said. "Because sometimes strangers can offer something people who know us can't. Distance, objectivity, and the freedom to be honest without worrying about what they'll think of you tomorrow." He knelt beside her wheelchair, not looming over her, but meeting her at eye level. Literally. "Tessa, I don't know what your life looks like. From here, I don't know how long it'll take you to heal from this, but I know you're going to be okay. I don't know how I know, but I do. And when you're ready, whether that's tomorrow or next month or next year, I hope you'll reach out, because I think you're someone worth knowing. Tears rolled down Tessa's face, but they weren't the same tears as before. These were different, softer, mixed with something that felt almost like hope. "Thank you," she whispered. Autumn threw her arms around Tessa's shoulders in an impulsive hug, nearly knocking the bouquet of petals from her lap. "Goodbye, Princess Tessa," she said. "I hope you feel better soon." Tessa hugged her back, this precious little girl who'd shown up and just loved without conditions or hesitation. "Goodbye, Autumn. Thank you for my party." As Malcolm and Autumn walked away hand in hand, Tessa sat there with the paper in her hand, looked at it, at the phone number, at the name written above it in neat handwriting. Malcolm. Foster. She didn't know if she'd call, didn't know if she'd ever see him again, didn't know anything except that for the first time since Tyler had walked out, she didn't feel completely broken. Her father approached, his face etched with concern and barely suppressed anger at Tyler. "Sweetheart, let's get you home." Tessa nodded, folding the paper carefully and tucking it into the bodice of her wedding dress, right over her heart. As her father wheeled her toward the parking lot, she looked back at the garden one more time, at the scattered rose petals, at the spot where a stranger and his daughter had sat with her and refused to let her be alone. And she thought, maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's just the beginning of something I never saw coming. That evening, as Tessa sat in her apartment finally out of the wedding dress, wearing comfortable clothes, her hair loose and free around her shoulders, her phone vibrated. She picked it up, expecting another message from Naomi, or her mother checking on her. Instead, it was an unknown number. "Hi, Tessa. It's Malcolm. Just wanted to make sure you got home safely. You don't have to respond if you don't want to. Just wanted you to know someone's thinking about you." Tessa stared at the message for a long moment. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to throw the phone across the room, to crawl into bed and never come out. But something stopped her. The memory of Malcolm sitting on the grass, the sincerity in his eyes, the way he'd talked to her, not with pity, but with respect. The way Autumn had called her a princess and actually meant it. Her fingers moved almost of their own accord. "I'm home. Thank you for today, for stopping, for staying. It meant more than you know." She sent it before she could change her mind. 3 minutes later, her phone vibrated again. "I'm glad. And I really meant what I said. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. No expectations. Just a friend who understands." Friend. When was the last time someone had offered her that, without wanting something in return? "I might take you up on that," she typed. "Fair warning, I'm kind of a mess right now." "Aren't we all?" came the response. "Rest, Tessa. Tomorrow's a new day." She set down her phone and leaned back against the couch, exhausted, but not drowning anymore. The wedding that should have happened was over, and yet somehow, impossibly, she felt the smallest flicker of something in her chest. Not happiness, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, hope. The days that followed were brutal. Tessa had to return wedding gifts, field calls from concerned relatives who'd heard what happened, deal with the pitying looks from neighbors who'd seen decorations being loaded at the church that morning and put 2 and 2 together. Tyler sent one message. "I'm sorry. I hope you understand." She didn't respond. What was there to say? That she didn't understand? That sorry wasn't enough? That he'd destroyed her in a way she wasn't sure she'd ever heal from? Instead, she deleted his number and blocked him on every platform. But through it all, Malcolm texted. Not constantly, not intrusively. He was just there. "How are you doing today? Saw a dog that looked like it had opinions. Made me think of your vet work. Autumn wants to know if you're feeling better. She drew you a picture. Can I send it?" Each message was a lifeline, a small reminder that someone out there saw her as more than a tragic wedding story. 5 days, after the wedding that wasn't, Tessa found herself actually waiting for Malcolm's messages. They'd started talking more, not about Tyler or the wedding, but about everything else. Books, movies, the challenges of single parenthood, the frustrations of physical therapy, the small joys that still existed even in dark times. Malcolm told her about Autumn's latest school project, how she'd insisted on making a get-well card for someone she'd just met, but already cared about. Tessa told him about her therapy sessions, about the anger she felt, about how some days she wanted to scream and other days she just wanted to disappear. And Malcolm never tried to fix it, never offered empty platitudes or toxic positivity. He just listened, and somehow that was exactly what she needed. 2 weeks after the garden, Malcolm sent a message that was different from the others. Autumn has a school event Friday. Nothing fancy, just a little art show where kids display their projects. She's been working on a painting and she's really proud of it. She asked if you'd like to come. Absolutely no pressure, but I wanted to pass along the invitation. Tessa stared at the message for a long time. Going out, being around people, facing the world after everything that had happened. It terrified her. But something about the invitation, the casualness of it, the fact that it wasn't a grand gesture but a simple offer, made her want to say yes. What time? She typed. 6 p.m. at the elementary school. Fair warning, there will be juice boxes and very enthusiastic children. Tessa smiled, her first real smile since the garden. I think I can handle that. Friday evening came too quickly. Tessa spent an hour trying to figure out what to wear, which was absurd because it was an elementary school art show, not a gala. But nothing felt right. Everything was either too formal or too casual or too much like trying too hard. Finally, she settled on jeans and a comfortable sweater. Simple, no nonsense, real. The school was bustling with activity when she arrived. Parents milling around the hallway, admiring crayon drawings and clay sculptures displayed on tables. Children running past, high on sugar and excitement. And there, near the back wall, was Malcolm. He spotted her immediately and smiled, warm, genuine, relieved that she'd actually come. You made it, he said, walking over. Almost didn't, Tessa admitted. But Autumn invited me, and I don't break promises made to 6-year-olds. Wise policy. Autumn appeared a moment later, her face lighting up like fireworks. Tessa, you came. She threw her arms around Tessa without hesitation, and Tessa hugged her back, feeling something warm and healing in the embrace. I wouldn't miss it, Tessa said. I heard you made a painting. Come see, come see. Autumn grabbed Tessa's hand and pulled her toward a small easel. The painting was abstract, swirls of color with bright bursts of sunshine and what might have been flowers or possibly birds. In the corner, in careful child's handwriting, was the title, When Bad Days End. It's beautiful, Tessa said quietly. Tell me about it. Well, Autumn began seriously, the dark colors are the bad things, like when people are sad or scared or something hurts. But see the yellow and orange? That's when the bad day ends and good things start happening. Because Daddy always says bad days end. Always. Tessa felt her throat tighten. Your daddy is very wise. I know, Autumn said proudly. For the next hour, Tessa found herself swept up in the simple joy of the evening. Autumn introduced her to friends. Malcolm stayed close, but didn't hover, giving her space to breathe while making sure she never felt alone. When a few parents cast curious glances at Tessa, noticing the wheelchair, maybe wondering who she was, Malcolm ignored it, didn't make a big deal of it, just treated her like anyone else, which was, Tessa realized, all she'd ever wanted. As the evening wound down and families started, leaving, Malcolm walked Tessa to her car. Thank you for coming, he said. Autumn hasn't stopped talking about you since that day at the church. She's pretty special. She really is, Tessa said. You're doing something very right. I'm doing what I can, Malcolm said. That's all any of us can do. Tessa looked at him in the fading light of the parking lot. This man who'd appeared at her worst moment and quietly, consistently, kept showing up ever since. Can I ask you something? She said. Suddenly. Anything. Why? Why did you stop that day? Why did you stay? Why are you still here, texting me and inviting me to art shows and being kind to someone you barely know? Malcolm was quiet for a moment, carefully choosing his words. Because 4 years ago, when my wife left, I felt completely alone, like I was drowning and everyone else was on the shore watching but not helping. And I promised myself that if I ever saw someone drowning, I wouldn't just watch. I'd reach out, even if I was a stranger. Even if it was awkward or uncomfortable, because someone should have done that for me. And I can't go back and fix my past, but I can show up in someone else's present. Tessa felt tears gathering, but they weren't sad tears. They were something else, something softer. "You saved me that day," she whispered. "You don't think you did, but you did. You saved yourself," Malcolm said gently. "I just reminded you that you could." Over the following weeks, something shifted. What had started as kindness transformed into friendship. Malcolm and Tessa started meeting for coffee. Just casual conversations, where they talked about everything and nothing. Autumn often joined them, coloring at the table while the adults talked. Tessa shared more about her life before the accident, her love of animals, her dreams of opening her own clinic someday, her fears that those dreams were now finished. Malcolm listened and asked questions, and never suggested that her wheelchair made those dreams impossible. "Adaptations," he said simply when she voiced doubt. "Not limitations. You find new ways to do the things you love." One afternoon, Tessa invited Malcolm and Autumn to visit an adaptive animal therapy program, where she'd started volunteering part-time. It was her first step back into the world she loved, and she was nervous about how it would go. Malcolm and Autumn showed up with a handmade sign that read, "We're proud of you, Tessa." She cried when she saw it. Happy tears, this time. Watching Malcolm interact with the therapy dogs, seeing how gentle he was with the animals, and how patiently he helped Autumn learn proper handling techniques, Tessa felt something stir in her chest, something she'd thought had died after Tyler. Attraction, interest, a flutter of possibility. But she pushed it down. It was too soon, too complicated. Malcolm was her friend, and she couldn't risk losing that by wanting more. 3 months after the garden, Autumn had a seizure. It happened late at night. Malcolm called Tessa at 2 a.m., his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I'm sorry to call so late," he said. "Autumn had a bad seizure. She's stable now, but I needed to hear a friendly voice." "I'm coming," Tessa said immediately. "You don't have to." "I'm coming," she repeated firmly. She arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later, navigating the sterile corridors until she found Malcolm in the waiting room. He looked exhausted, hair disheveled, eyes shadowed with the kind of fear that never fully leaves a parent in moments like this. Tessa rolled up and took his hand. "She's okay," Malcolm said, more to convince himself than her. "The doctors say she's stable, but it was bad, Tessa. Really bad." For a few minutes I thought he didn't finish the sentence. "But she's okay," Tessa said firmly. "She's here. You're here. That's what counts." They sat together in the waiting room until the doctors let Malcolm back to see Autumn. Tessa stayed, refusing to leave even when Malcolm assured her she could go home. "You were there for me on my worst day," she said. "I'm here for yours." When dawn came and Autumn was finally discharged with instructions to rest and follow up with her neurologist, Malcolm drove Tessa home. They sat in his car outside her apartment building, both too tired to move. "Thank you," Malcolm said quietly, "for showing up, for staying. That's what friends do," Tessa said. But as she said it, she realized with striking clarity that friend wasn't the right word anymore. Somewhere between the garden and the art show and the hospital waiting room, something had changed. She was falling in love with him, falling in love with Malcolm Foster, this kind, patient, steadfast man who'd seen her at her lowest and hadn't turned away, who'd introduced her to his daughter without hesitation, who'd made room in his life for someone else's pain without expecting anything in return. And it terrified her. Because what if she wasn't enough? What if, like Tyler, Malcolm eventually decided that being with someone in a wheelchair was too complicated, too difficult, too much? What if she opened her heart again only to have it destroyed a second time? Days turned into weeks, and the dynamic between Tessa and Malcolm continued to evolve. They talked every day, saw each other several times a week. Autumn had started calling Tessa her extra friend, and the three of them had fallen into an easy rhythm that felt almost like family. But Tessa kept her feelings locked away, safe, protected behind walls that Tyler's abandonment had built, until one Saturday afternoon when everything changed. Malcolm invited Tessa to join them for a day at the park. It was late fall, 6 months since the garden, and the leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. They packed a picnic. Autumn ran around collecting acorns, while Malcolm and Tessa sat together on a bench. "Can I ask you something personal?" Malcolm said. Suddenly, Tessa felt her stomach flip. "Okay." "That day at the church, he began carefully. When I met you, you were at rock bottom. And look at you now. You're volunteering. You're smiling. You're living. How did you do it? Tessa thought about the question. Really thought about it. Honestly, she said. You. Malcolm looked surprised. You, Tessa repeated. You showed me I was worth showing up for. Tyler taught me I was a burden. That loving me required too much sacrifice. But you just kept showing up. No drama, no grand gestures. You were just there. And gradually, I started believing that maybe I'm not as broken as I thought. Malcolm was quiet for a long moment. Tessa, he said finally, can I tell you something that might be completely inappropriate? Her heart started beating faster. Yes, I didn't stop in that garden just to be nice, he said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I mean, I did, but it became something more. Over these past months, getting to know you, seeing who you are when you're not in crisis, I've realized something. What? She whispered. I'm falling in love with you. The world seemed to tilt. And I know that might be too much too soon. Malcolm continued quickly. I know you're still healing from what Tyler did. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is complicated. But I needed you to know. Because I don't want to just be your friend anymore, Tessa. I want to be something more. And I need to know if that's even possible or if I should. Tessa kissed him. She'd never been a particularly brave person. But in that moment, she didn't care about fear or consequences or the possibility of being hurt again. She leaned forward and kissed Malcolm Foster with everything she had. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Tessa laughed, a sound of pure joy that surprised even her. Yes, she said. Yes, it's possible. Yes, I'm falling in love with you too. Yes to everything. Malcolm's smile could have lit up the entire park. Autumn chose that exact moment to return, waving a particularly large acorn. Look what I found. It's huge. She stopped, noticing the way Malcolm and Tessa were looking at each other. Why are you both smiling so big? Because, Malcolm said, pulling his daughter into a hug, while keeping one hand intertwined with Tessa's. Today is a very good day. Finally, Autumn exclaimed. I've been waiting forever for you two to kiss. Both adults. I laughed, and Tessa felt something she hadn't felt in almost a year. Wholeness. The months that followed weren't perfect. Tessa still had bad days. Days when the trauma of the wedding that wasn't haunted her. Days when she struggled with her disability and the ways her life had changed. Days when doubt crept in and whispered that maybe she wasn't enough. But Malcolm was there. Always. He adapted his car to make it easier for Tessa to transfer from her wheelchair. Not because she asked, but because he paid attention and wanted to make her life easier. He learned about spinal cord injuries and accessibility and how to support her without being patronizing. He introduced her to his family as his girlfriend, with pride, not shame. And when Tessa's physical therapy sessions were particularly brutal, he showed up with takeout and terrible movies and the understanding that sometimes love looked like just sitting together in comfortable silence. Tessa, for her part, was there for Malcolm. When work stress mounted, she listened. When Autumn's seizures scared him, she reminded him of his strength. When he doubted his abilities as a single parent, she showed him all the ways he was succeeding. They built a life together. Not quickly, not perfectly, but authentically. 1 year after the garden, Malcolm took Tessa back to Riverside Community Church. She was nervous about returning. The place still held painful memories. The wedding dress, the tears, the humiliation. But Malcolm asked her to trust him, and she did. They arrived in the late afternoon, the same spring light filtering through the trees as it had on that devastating May day. Malcolm wheeled Tessa toward the side garden, and her breath stopped. It was filled with white roses, dozens of them. Malcolm, what? He knelt beside her wheelchair, at her level, and took both her hands in his. Tessa, a year ago I found you in this garden on what should have been the worst day of your life, and I've watched you transform that pain into strength, watched you reclaim your dreams, rebuild your confidence, and show me what real courage looks like. Tears were already streaming down her face. You've shown Autumn what resilience means. You've shown me what it's like to be truly seen and accepted. And you've proven that the right person doesn't see obstacles. They see possibilities to love better. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The first wedding dress you wore was meant for the wrong person. And I'm not trying to erase that day or pretend it didn't happen. But I want to give you a new memory, a better one. One where someone kneels beside you and asks, not because they're settling, not because they're being noble, but because they honestly can't imagine their life without you. He opened the box. Inside was a simple ring, platinum band with a single diamond that caught the afternoon light. Tessa, will you marry me? Not despite your wheelchair, not overlooking it, but loving all of you, exactly as you are, for the rest of my life. The world went silent. Tessa looked at this man, this beautiful, kind, patient man who'd appeared when she needed him most, and who'd proven every single day since that his love was real and solid and unwavering. Yes, she whispered. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Malcolm slid the ring onto her finger, and Tessa pulled him into a kiss that tasted like salt and joy and new beginnings. When they pulled apart, Autumn burst from behind a tree where she'd been hiding. She said yes! She said yes! The little girl shouted, running over to hug them both. You knew? Tessa laughed through her tears. Of course I knew, Autumn said. Daddy told me 2 weeks ago. We've been planning everything. Tessa looked around the garden, really looked, and she saw it now. The careful placement of the roses, the way the petals formed a path, the small table set up with champagne and juice boxes for Autumn, the photographer emerging from the shadows with a camera, having captured the entire proposal. You planned all this? She asked Malcolm. I wanted to replace the bad memory with a good one, he said simply. This garden, this is where our story started. I wanted it to also be where our forever began. Tessa laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness, by the love, by the sheer impossible beauty of how her life had changed. 1 year ago she'd been abandoned in a wedding dress, broken and alone, certain her life was over. Now she was engaged to a man who saw her, really saw her, and loved her not despite her challenges but including them, who'd brought his daughter into their relationship with joy, who'd shown her that the right love doesn't require you to change or hide or diminish yourself. The right love just shows up and stays. 6 months later, the wedding was small, intimate, exactly what they wanted. 50 people gathered in that same church garden, now decorated with white. Roses and fairy lights strung through the trees. Autumn stood as Tessa's mini maid of honor, wearing a dress she'd helped pick out and holding a basket of rose petals. Tessa wore a different dress this time, simpler, more her, designed specifically to work with her wheelchair. Her sister Naomi stood beside her, tears already streaming down her face, and Malcolm waited at the front, next to the officiant, looking at Tessa like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. When it was time, Malcolm didn't wait for Tessa to come to him. Instead, he walked down the aisle to where she waited, knelt beside her wheelchair, and took her hand. Ready? He asked softly. I've been ready since the moment you sat down on the grass, she said. Together, Malcolm walking beside Tessa's wheelchair, Autumn following behind scattering petals, they moved to the front of the garden. The ceremony was simple. They'd written their own vows. Tessa, Malcolm began, his voice steady but full of emotion. A year and a half ago, I found you in this garden when your world had fallen apart. And you taught me that sometimes the most important thing we can do is show up. You showed me what real strength looks like, what genuine courage means, and what it feels like to be loved exactly as I am. A single dad with a daughter who has seizures, with all my flaws and fears and imperfections. You never asked me to be anything other than myself, and I promise to do the same for you. To see you, all of you, every single day. To adapt when we need to be patient when things are hard, and to choose you over and over again for the rest of my life. Tessa was already crying, but she smiled through the tears. Malcolm, when Tyler left, he told me he wanted a normal wife, someone whose life would be easy. And for a long time I believed him. I believed I was too much, too complicated, too broken. But you showed me something different. You showed me that love isn't about finding easy. It's about finding worth it. And you've made me feel worth it every single day. You've loved Autumn with your whole heart, even when it scared you. You've loved me with my wheelchair. with my bad days, with all the ways my life requires adaptation, and you've never once made me feel like a burden. So I promise to love you the same way, to show up for Autumn's seizures, to be there on your hard days, to choose us, our weird, beautiful, imperfect family, every single day for the rest of my life. When the officiant pronounced them married, Malcolm leaned down and kissed his wife with the entire garden full of people cheering. Autumn bounced on her toes, scattering the last of her rose petals into the air like confetti. And Tessa felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, not in the life she'd planned, not in the story she'd imagined, but in something better, something real, something that had started with a broken moment and turned into the most beautiful new beginning she could have, dreamed of. 5 years later, Tessa stood, or rather, wheeled, through the doors of her new veterinary clinic. Second Chances Animal Care, the sign outside read. She'd opened it 8 months ago with Malcolm's encouragement and Autumn's enthusiastic assistance in decorating. The clinic was fully accessible, designed specifically to accommodate both veterinarians and pet owners with disabilities. Ramps, wide doorways, adjustable exam tables, everything she'd learned she needed over the years, built into a space where everyone was welcome. She was in the middle of examining a nervous terrier when the door chimed, and Malcolm walked in with Autumn, now 11 years old, tall and confident, wearing the purple shirt she'd declared was her new favorite. "How's your day?" Malcolm asked, leaning down to kiss his wife. 3 cats, 2 dogs, 1 very dramatic guinea pig. So pretty standard. Tessa smiled. "What are you two doing here?" "Well," Autumn said, barely containing her excitement. "Dad wanted to take you to lunch, but also I have news." "What news?" Autumn pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to Tessa. It was a letter from the regional science fair, first place in her age category for her project on adaptive technology. "Autumn, this is amazing." Tessa pulled the girl into a hug. "I couldn't have done it without you," Autumn said. "You helped me understand how to make technology that actually helps people, that actually sees what they need." Tessa felt her throat tighten with emotion. This girl, this beautiful, kind, brilliant girl, had been in her life for 5 years now. And sometime along the way, without Tessa even quite noticing, Autumn had stopped being Malcolm's daughter and become their daughter. She called Tessa Mom T and saved her science projects to show Tessa first, and asked for advice on everything from homework to friendships to the complexities of middle school social dynamics. "I'm so proud of you," Tessa said. "Come on," Malcolm said. "Let's celebrate. Lunch is on me." As they left the clinic, Tessa paused for a moment, looking back at the sign. Second Chances Animal Care. She thought about that day in the garden, about how completely destroyed she'd felt, about how certain she'd been that her life was over. And she thought about Malcolm, appearing like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to say, about Autumn's unconditional love, about the family they'd built from broken pieces. Sometimes, she realized, the worst day of your life becomes the doorway to the best chapter. Sometimes being left at the altar by the wrong person makes room for the right person to walk into your life. Sometimes the story you thought was ending is actually just beginning. Malcolm took her hand as they walked, or in Tessa's case, rolled, down the street together, Autumn chattering between them about her science project and her plans for next year's competition. And Tessa thought, This is everything I was always meant to have. I just didn't know it yet. The sun was warm on her face. Her family was beside her. Her dream clinic was thriving behind her. And in that moment, Tessa was exactly where she was supposed to be. If this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the doorways to our greatest blessings. Sometimes being rejected by the wrong person makes room for the right person to find you. Sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beautiful, new beginning. Share this with someone who needs to know that their story isn't over. It's just beginning. Subscribe if you believe in second chances, in the kind of love that shows up and stays, in the power of kindness from strangers who become family. Because sometimes the person who saves your life is the one you never saw coming, and that's the most beautiful kind of love there is.